Strait of Hormuz, Sector Choke Point Alpha, 4:52 a.m. The darkness is absolute. The moon is set, leaving the narrowest stretch of water in the world, 21 miles wide, shrouded in ink-black obscurity. To the north, the jagged silhouette of the Iranian mountains blocks the stars. To the south, the faint glow of the Omani coast is just a haze. The water is calm, deceptively peaceful. It looks like a sheet of black glass, but at 4:52 a.m. that peace was murdered. Slipping through the dark water, running silent on battery power to evade thermal sensors, was the Iranian mine layer Iran Ajr 2. This wasn't a standard warship. It was a phantom. Painted in radar-absorbing matte black, running without navigation lights, it was invisible to the naked eye and a ghost on the screens of passing freighters. It wasn't alone. Behind it, spreading out like a cancerous web, was a flotilla of 40 converted merchant dhows, fishing trawlers, and military tugs. To any satellite passing overhead, they looked like early morning fishermen. They weren't looking for fish. They were planting seeds of death. Splash, splash, splash. The sound was rhythmic, mechanical, and terrifying. Hundreds of Sadaf II naval bottom mines were rolling off the stern racks. These aren't the rusty, floating spheres with spikes you see in World War II movies. These are advanced, bottom-dwelling predators. They sink to the seabed, burying themselves in the silt. They are equipped with multi-influence sensors, acoustic, magnetic, and pressure. They don't explode for just anything. They listen. They wait for the specific rhythmic cavitation of a supertanker's massive screw. They are smart. They are lethal. And in the murky, shallow waters of the strait, they are invisible. At 5:05 a.m., the Liberian-flagged supertanker Frontline Spirit, a floating city of steel carrying 2 million barrels of Saudi-light crude, entered the sector. The ship was 1,100 feet long, longer than the Eiffel Tower is tall. It was drafting 22 meters deep. On the bridge, the captain sipped his coffee, watching the radar. The green sweep showed clear water for 10 miles. He didn't know he was sailing into a kill box. At 5:07 a.m., the Frontline Spirit passed over mine 142. The magnetic signature of 100,000 tons of steel triggered the sensor. The mine released from its anchor, rocket-propelled upwards, and detonated directly under the keel. Boom! The explosion didn't just breach the hull, it broke the ship's back. The physics of the blast were catastrophic. The shockwave lifted the center of the massive vessel 5 feet out of the water before slamming it back down. The keel snapped like a dry twig. A geyser of black oil and white water shot 300 feet into the air, coating the bridge windows in crude. The massive ship shuddered, groaned with the sound of tearing metal, and began to list violently to port. The bridge alarms screamed a cacophony of digital terror. Mayday calls screamed across the radio frequencies, cutting through the morning calm. Mayday! Mayday! This is Frontline Spirit. We are hit. Massive explosion amidships. We are taking on water. The strait is mined. Repeat, the strait is mined. The warning came too late. Within 30 minutes, 2 more tankers, the Golden Ray and the Hormuz Star, trigger mines in the adjacent shipping lanes. Pillars of fire lit up the dawn sky. The smell of burning crude oil began to drift towards Dubai. By 6:00 a.m., the insurance giant Lloyd E.S. of London held an emergency meeting and declared the entire Strait of Hormuz a war risk zone. They suspended all hull and machinery coverage immediately. By 8:00 a.m., the radio chatter in the Persian Gulf went dead. Every tanker captain from Basra to Fujairah dropped anchor. The engines stopped. The flow of oil stopped. 20% of the world's daily oil supply, the lifeblood of the global economy, was instantly cut off. This wasn't just a naval incident, it was an economic heart attack. The financial shockwave moved faster than the blast wave. In New York, algorithmic trading bots reacted to the news headlines in microseconds. Oil futures spiked from $75 to $150 a barrel in 4 minutes of trading. It was the steepest rise in history. In London, the FTSE 100 crashed, losing 8% of its value before the opening bell even rang. And in the United States, panic set in with the speed of a virus. News networks flashed, strait closed, and red banners. Gas stations in California, New York, and Texas saw lines forming within hours. People were filling gas cans, water bottles, anything that could hold fuel. Speculation ran wild. By the 72-hour mark, the unimaginable happened. The average price of a gallon of gas in America hit $12. In Los Angeles, it was $18. Fights broke out at pumps. Trucking companies stopped running, unable to afford the fuel to move food. Airlines canceled 40% of their flights. The U.S. economy wasn't just slowing down, it was entering cardiac arrest. Tehran watched the chaos on CNN and cheered. They believed they had finally found the superweapon. They didn't need nukes, they didn't need aircraft carriers, they just needed to close the road. They believed that by holding the American consumer hostage, they could dictate terms to the White House. They thought the Americans, terrified of inflation and recession, would beg for a ceasefire. They were wrong. What happened next wasn't a negotiation. It was the most violent, systematic application of kinetic force in the history of the Fifth Fleet. Iran thought they had closed the door to the world. The United States Navy was about to blow the wall down. This is the story of the 72 hours that shook the world, and the 4 hours that ended the Iranian Navy. Let's rewind 48 hours. Tehran. The Supreme Leader's compound, a bunker 200 feet underground. The decision was made in desperation. Sanctions were strangling the regime. The currency was worthless. The people were starving. They needed leverage. General Hossein Salami, commander of the Revolutionary Guards, presented Operation Iron Net. He pointed to a map of the strait. "We do not need to defeat the American Navy," he argued, his voice echoing in the concrete room. "We only need to make the water too dangerous to sail. If we mine the strait, the insurance rates will stop the ships. The Americans are afraid of mines. They are traumatized by them. In 1988, a single cheap mine nearly sank the USS Samuel B. Roberts. They are risk-averse. They will not send their precious $13 billion carriers into a minefield. We will hold the world's energy supply by the throat, and we will squeeze until they lift every sanction." The plan was massive in scale. 3,000 mines, 50 coastal missile batteries on high alert, the entire IRGCN fleet, hundreds of fast boats, deployed to guard the minefield under the guise of protection patrols. They calculated the timeline carefully. They estimated that clearing 3,000 mines would take the U.S. Navy 6 months using standard protocols, 6 months of $12 gas, 6 months of economic ruin. They believed the U.S. president would be forced to capitulate just to get the oil flowing again. They executed the plan perfectly. The mines were laid, the trap was set, the global economy screamed. But Iran made 3 catastrophic mistakes. First, they underestimated the Strategic Petroleum Reserve, SPR, and the American tolerance for pain. They thought $12 gas would cause a revolution in the U.S. They expected Americans to demand peace. Instead, it caused a cold, unified rage. The American public didn't demand surrender. They demanded action. They demanded revenge. The president didn't call Tehran to negotiate. He walked into the Situation Room and called the Pentagon. And he didn't ask, "How do we fix the prices?" He asked, "How fast can you clear it?" The answer from Admiral Lisa Franchetti, Chief of Naval Operations, was terrifyingly short. She didn't offer excuses. She offered a timeline. "Give us 48 hours to position the assets, Mr. President, and then give us 4 hours to clear the board." Second, they misunderstood the technology of mine warfare in 2026. The Iranians were fighting the last war. They thought the U.S. Navy would send in slow, wooden-hulled Avenger-class minesweepers that were vulnerable to attack. They planned to pick them off one by one with speedboats. They didn't know about Task Force 59, the Unmanned Systems Task Force. The U.S. Navy wasn't going to send sailors into the minefield to die. They were going to send robots, hundreds of them. Knifefish UUVs, unmanned underwater vehicles, that can map the seafloor in 4K resolution. Sea Hunter autonomous trimarans that hunt mines like wolves. Kingfish towed sonars that see through the mud. Iran prepared to fight flesh and blood. They were about to fight machines that felt no fear, needed no sleep, and could identify a mine with 99.9% accuracy in pitch-black water. Third, and this was the fatal error, they assumed the rules of engagement would be defensive. They thought they could hide behind the phrase sovereign territory. They thought they could fire missiles from their coast if the Americans tried to clear the mines, and the Americans would only shoot down the missiles in self-defense. They didn't realize that the act of mining international waters is a casus belli, an act of war. The moment the frontline spirit exploded, the rules of engagement for the U.S. Fifth Fleet shifted from self-defense to offensive countermine operations. This meant that any unit, land or sea, that attempted to interfere with the clearing operation was designated hostile. And hostile meant target. Iran thought they were laying a siege. They didn't realize they had just invited the wolf into their living room. The 72nd hour. The crisis was at its peak. In the United States, gas pumps were dry. The National Guard was protecting refineries. The stock market had lost 15% of its value. The world was holding its breath. In the Strait of Hormuz, the silence was eerie. Dozens of tankers were anchored miles away, refusing to move. The Iranian Navy was patrolling the minefield, their radios broadcasting warnings. "This area is closed. Any attempt to enter will be met with force." They felt triumphant. They had done it. They had brought the great Satan to its knees without firing a shot at a warship. But just over the horizon, out of sight of the Iranian radars, the hammer was gathering. The USS Abraham Lincoln Carrier Strike Group CSG-3, the USS Baton Amphibious Ready Group, and significantly the USS Ponce and USS Lewis B. Puller, the floating sea bases. They weren't alone. The sky was filling up. B-52 Stratofortresses were lifting off from Diego Garcia. F-15E Strike Eagles were launching from Al Udeid Air Base in Qatar. The U.S. military wasn't mobilizing for patrol. They were mobilizing for a sanitization operation. The ultimatum. At 6 a.m. local time, exactly 72 hours after the first mine was laid, the United States issued a message to all mariners. It wasn't sent to Tehran. It was sent to the world. United States Naval Forces Central Command will commence mine clearance operations in the Strait of Hormuz at 0700. At 6:58 a.m., the Iranian fast boat swarm, 100 vessels, began to pour out of the coves of Keshem and Larak Islands. They were rushing to defend their minefield. They were rushing to their deaths. So 7:00 a.m., the operation begins. The first move didn't come from a carrier. It came from the Lewis B. Puller. Launch the Ghosts. From the stern ramp of the massive sea base, 50 small black shapes slid into the water. They looked like torpedoes, but they weren't weapons. They were Remus 600 autonomous underwater vehicles. Simultaneously, 4 MH-53E Sea Dragon helicopters, the biggest, loudest helicopters in the Navy, lifted off from the Baton. They were towing massive sleds behind them, the Mk-105 magnetic minesweeping gear. The robots went deep. The helicopters stayed low. They entered the minefield. On the Iranian coast, the radar operators saw the helicopters. Targets acquired, 4 slow-moving helicopters, easy kills. The Iranian commander gave the order, fire. From a hidden battery near Bandar Abbas, 4 Sayyad-3 surface-to-air missiles streaked into the sky. Smoke trails painted the blue morning air. They were heading straight for the Sea Dragons. The pilots of the minesweeping helicopters didn't panic. They didn't even drop their gear. They knew they were the bait, and the trap was about to snap. 07:02 a.m., the shield. Vampire, land-based launch. The call came from the USS Mobile Bay, CG-53, the Ticonderoga-class cruiser riding shotgun for the operation. Auto special, take them. The VLS cells on the Mobile Bay erupted. Standard Missile 6, SM-6 interceptors roared into the sky. These missiles are hypervelocity kinetic killers. The interception was mathematical perfection. 4 miles from the helicopters, the American missiles slammed into the Iranian missiles. Boom, 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 boom. 4 white clouds appeared in the sky. The helicopters kept flying, their magnetic sleds churning the water. But the Iranians weren't done. Launch the swarm! Overwhelm them! The 100 fast boats pushed their throttles to the stops. They were 10 miles out, closing at 40 knots. They planned to race into the minefield, weaving through the mines they knew the location of, and attack the defenseless minesweepers with rockets and RPGs. They thought the American destroyers wouldn't follow them into the mined water. They were right. The destroyers didn't follow. The Apaches did. On 7:05 a.m., the air cavalry. From the deck of the USS Baton, the U.S. Army, yes, the Army, had joined the fight. A squadron of AH-64E Apache Guardians had been forward deployed to the ship for exactly this mission. They lifted off, their stub wings heavy with Hellfire missiles and Hydra rocket pods. They were joined by the Marine Corps AH-1Z Vipers. It was a swarm versus swarm battle, but one swarm was made of fiberglass boats. The other was made of armored attack helicopters. Target-rich environment, the lead Apache pilot drawled. Let's mow the lawn. The helicopters didn't fly over the boats. They hovered 4 miles away, using their longbow radars to target. Rifle. Hellfire missiles began to rain down. It wasn't a battle. It was an industrial dismantling of the IRGCN. Boat 1 vaporized, Boat 5 exploded. Boat 12 cut in half by 30mm chain gun fire. The Iranian boats tried to fire their heavy machine guns at the sky, but the helicopters were out of range. They were dying without ever seeing their enemy. Within 10 minutes, 40 boats were burning. The rest turned around, trying to flee back to the coast. But the U.S. Navy wasn't letting them go. No leakers? Finish them. Strait of Hormuz, 07:15 a.m. The mine-clearing operation was proceeding. The Remus robots were identifying mines on the seabed. The MH-53 helicopters were detonating the magnetic mines. Geysers of water erupted every few seconds as the mines were neutralized. Each explosion was a victory for the global economy. But the real war was happening on the coast. Iran realized their swarm had failed. Their missiles had been shot down. They decided to escalate to level red. Fire the ballistic missiles. Target the carrier. Deep inside the Iranian mainland, near Shiraz, underground silos opened. Global Hawk drones cruising at 60,000 feet detected the heat signatures immediately. Launch detected. IRBMs, Khalij FARs, anti-ship ballistic missiles. These were the carrier killers. Hypersonic, maneuvering warheads designed to plunge through the flight deck of a supercarrier. 6 missiles were airborne. Target, USS Abraham Lincoln. This was the moment military analysts had feared for decades. Could the carrier strike group survive a ballistic missile attack? Admiral Franchetti on the Lincoln didn't look worried. She looked focused. Aegis ashore and afloat. Coordinate. The U.S. Navy's defense network is layered. Layer 1, the USS Lake Champlain cruiser. Layer 2, the USS Paul Hamilton destroyer. Layer 3, the THAAD batteries stationed in the UAE. They all talk to each other in microseconds. Tracks firm. Solution shared. Engaging. From the deck of the Lake Champlain, the massive SM-3 Block 2IA missiles launched. These are not atmospheric missiles. They are space weapons. They are designed to hit a bullet with a bullet in the exosphere. The Iranian missiles climbed to the edge of space, reaching Mach 7. The SM-3s met them there. Space, 100 miles above the Persian Gulf, lit up silently. Flash, flash, flash. Kinetic warheads slammed into the Iranian missiles, shattering them into thousands of harmless shards of metal that burned up on re-entry. On the radar screens, in the Combat Information Center, the red tracks vanished. Splash 6, all threats eliminated. The carrier was untouched. Now it was time for the counterpunch. The U.S. had defended. Now they would attack. The rules of engagement stated, eliminate the source of fire. The source was the missile batteries, the radar sites, the command bunkers. Authorized Strike Package Bravo, Tomahawks, Spirits, Lancers. 07:30 a.m. The invisible bomber. High above the chaos, invisible to every radar in the Middle East, 2 B-2 Spirit stealth bombers had arrived from Whiteman Air Force Base in Missouri. They had been flying for 30 hours. Their bomb bays were open. Spirit, Slanum 1-1, feet dry, targets verified. Coastal missile batteries, Alpha through Zulu. They weren't dropping dumb bombs, they were dropping the GBU-53B Stormbreaker, a smart, gliding, network-enabled bomb. Each B-2 can carry dozens. Click, clack. The bombs dropped, wings deployed. They glided silently toward the Iranian coast. Simultaneously, the USS Florida, SSGN, surfaced its VLS tubes. 50 Tomahawk land attack missiles, TLAMs, roared into the air. It was a symphony of destruction. The Stormbreakers found the mobile missile trucks hiding in the caves. They used millimeter wave radar to see through the camouflage nets. Boom! The Tomahawks found the fixed radar sites and command bunkers. Crump. The Iranian coast erupted. Battery 1, destroyed. Battery 4, ammunition cook-off. Massive fireball. Radar site, Bandar, flattened. Command bunker, Keshem, penetrated by a bunker-buster warhead, collapsed. In 20 minutes, the entire anti-access, area denial, A2AD network that Iran had spent 20 years and billions of dollars building was systematically dismantled. They were blind, they were deaf, and they were defenseless. 08:00 a.m., the naval slaughter. With the coastal missiles gone, the U.S. destroyers moved in. Close the beach, hunt the mine layers. The Iran Ajr II and the converted Dows were trying to hide in the inlets. The USS Zumwalt, DDG-1000, was in the lead. The stealth destroyer. It looks like a pyramid. On radar, it looks like a fishing boat, but it carries 2 155mm advanced gun systems, AGS. Targets identified. Mine layers. Fire. The AGS is accurate to within a few meters at 60 miles. The shells rained down on the Iranian ships. The mine layers didn't have a chance. They were slow, heavy with mines, and trapped. One by one, they were picked off. When a shell hit a mine layer, the result was spectacular. The mines still on board detonated. The Iran Ajr II vanished in a cloud of white water and shockwaves that shattered windows 10 miles away. The sea was being cleansed. Mine-laying capability neutralized, the Zumwalt reported. Strait of Hormuz. 09:00 a.m., 2 hours into the combat operation. The shooting had largely stopped. The Iranian military machine in the southern sector was broken. Smoke columns rose from the coastline like black pillars supporting the sky. But the work wasn't done. The mines were still in the water. Admiral Franchetti gave the order, accelerate clearance, all assets. Now that the threat of missiles and speedboats was gone, the heavy sweepers moved in. The robots worked faster. The helicopters flew lower. Mine located. Grid 4-4, detonating. Whump. Mine located. Grid 4-5, detonating. It was a rhythmic drumbeat of progress. Every explosion meant another mile of safe water. The U.S. Navy also deployed the Sea Fox, a small fiber-optic guided drone that swims up to a mine and detonates a shaped charge. It is a suicide drone for mines. Fox away, target acquired. Boom. Fox away, target acquired. Boom. By 10:00 a.m., a channel 2 miles wide had been cleared through the center of the minefield. Channel Alpha is open. Mark it. Buoy tenders moved in, dropping green, safe water markers. The price of gas. While the battle raged, the markets reacted. At 7 a.m., when the operation started, oil was at $160. At 8 a.m., when the Iranian missiles were shot down, it dropped to $140. At 9 a.m., when the coastal batteries were destroyed, it hit $120. At 10 a.m., the U.S. Navy released a photo. It wasn't a photo of a burning ship. It was a photo of the USS Abraham Lincoln steaming through the Strait of Hormuz, flanked by the tanker Frontline Spirit, which was being towed to safety. The caption, "Open for business." The markets crashed, in a good way. Oil plummeted, $110, $100, $90. The panic evaporated. The speculators realized that the U.S. Navy had just guaranteed the supply. By noon, the price of gas in American futures markets had dropped back to pre-crisis levels. The 72-hour nightmare was over, the cleanup. On the water, the U.S. forces began the transition from combat to police action. The surviving Iranian sailors from the speedboats were pulled from the water. There were hundreds of them. They were cold, wet, and defeated. They had been promised glory. They had been promised that the Americans would run. Instead, they had seen the sky turn black with helicopters and missiles. U.S. Marines on the baton processed the prisoners. Name, rank, unit. Most of them were just kids, conscripts. They looked at the massive American ships with awe. "We were told you were weak," one prisoner mumbled. The Marine sergeant guarding him just pointed to the horizon, where the smoke from the destroyed Iranian bases was still rising. "Does that look weak to you?" The scorecard. The engagement lasted 4 hours of intense combat, following 72 hours of tension. Iranian losses. Naval assets, 65. Fast attack craft sunk, 4. Mine layers sunk. 2 frigates, dockside, destroyed. Coastal defenses, 14 anti-ship missile batteries destroyed. 8 radar sites eliminated, 3 command bunkers destroyed. Missiles, 6 ballistic missiles intercepted. 24 cruise missiles intercepted. Casualties, estimated 800 plus KIA. 1,500 wounded, 200 captured. Strategic loss, the ability to close the Strait of Hormuz was eliminated for at least a generation. U.S. losses, ships, 0 damage, aircraft, 0 losses, equipment, 4 Seafox drones expended, 40 KA each. 200 Hellfire missiles, 50 Tomahawks, 6 SM-3s, casualties, 0 killed, 0 wounded. Economic cost of operation, $200 million. Economic value saved, trillions. The aftermath. Tehran was in shock. The state media tried to spin it. They claimed they had repelled the invasion and inflicted heavy losses. But the Iranians aren't isolated. They have smartphones. They have VPNs. They saw the videos. They saw the Apache gun camera footage. They saw the satellite photos of the destroyed bases. The regime looked impotent. Protests erupted in Tehran, not against America, but against the government that had recklessly gambled with the nation's security and lost everything. Death to the dictator replaced death to America in the streets. The supreme leader went into seclusion. The general who planned the operation was arrested for incompetence and never seen again. The lesson. The lesson learned that week was profound. For decades, the world had assumed that closing the Strait of Hormuz was Iran's nuclear option. Oh, a doomsday switch that would wreck the global economy. The U.S. Navy proved that it wasn't a doomsday switch, it was a suicide switch. They proved that mine warfare, while dangerous, is not insurmountable when you have robots, lasers, and air supremacy. They proved that you cannot hold the world hostage when the sheriff is in town. And most importantly, they proved that the American consumer's wallet is a national security priority. You can burn a flag, you can shout slogans, but if you touch the gas pump, the Fifth Fleet will visit you, and they won't knock. The final image, sunset over the Strait of Hormuz. The water is gold and orange. The USS Abraham Lincoln is turning into the wind to recover aircraft. An F-35C lands, catching the 3-wire. In the background, a line of supertankers stretches to the horizon. They are moving. The oil is flowing. The lights stay on in Tokyo. The cars keep driving in Los Angeles. The factories keep humming in Berlin. Because at 4:52 a.m., when the world tried to stop, 5,000 American sailors stood up and said, "Not on my watch." Passage secured. Mission accomplished. Freedom of navigation, non-negotiable. Script ends.